So today we are delighted to have Dr. Stephanie Howard with us today. She is the Superintendent of Midland Independent School District. So anyone who has any ties to Midland, you need no introduction. But for those of us less familiar, let's get acquainted. Anyone who wears a blouse with that many colors, there has to be a little bit of fun in there somewhere.
Okay, let's see.
My name is Samantha Goosen. I'm from Fluga Architects. I'm a project architect, and I'm going to be one of the project architects who's actually working on the 2 new high schools. So we've met in passing, never formally met you, so it's very nice to finally meet you.
It's great to sit down with you today.
So how do you define a leader, and what do you think are the important qualities of a leader?
So, I think about a leader as someone who inspires others, someone who equips people to be able to do the work that they do. I think back over the years and, as a leader, there are many times you have to point out strengths of others that they don't see in themselves and really encourage them to take that leap of faith, to take that next step, to lead at another level, all the way, across the organization. I think back to when I was a new principal and having a teacher that didn't see the potential that they had, so to me, a leader pulls those potentials out of other people and helps them realize they can provide so much more influence as they work through the organization. I also think a leader is someone who's calm during times of challenge, someone who's also brave and courageous during times of challenge. The whole organization looks to the leader, whether that be at the campus level, the district level. And so a leader has to be someone that can maintain that calmness when the storm is all around them and really bring the team along, engage their team as they work through that, and look at all sides and all angles. And then, once you make the decision, what's right and best for the organization, being willing to stand on that.
So who do you think was the most influential in your journey to being where you are now? Who inspired you?
So, I think about family and then I think about work. And so I'll start with family. Of course, that was my dad. Dad was in the school business for 36 years. He taught, he was a coach, he was an athletic director. So he wasn't only my dad, but he was my teacher at certain grade levels. He was my coach in certain sports. But he really inspired us and taught us to outwork everyone, to compete every day, to never let them see you sweat, even when times were tough. The job of a leader is to show up and provide hope, provide calmness, to provide stability. Then when I think about from a professional angle, I had 2 gentlemen actually in Midland ISD, and that's one of the reasons I threw my name in the hat to come back to Midland when this job opened up a little over 3 years ago. Because of the investment that leaders made in me during my time here, the first 14 years. So I think about Ricardo Torres, his pictures here in my office. He was my direct supervisor when I was a high school principal and a junior high principal. He was our assistant superintendent for secondary schools. He was one of those that we had so much respect for. He demanded a lot out of us. He expected a lot out of us, but he supported us just as much. We always wanted to make him proud. You didn't want to disappoint Mr. Torres. And so I think about, that early experience of a leader that set the bar so high. And, while some people don't like that and they might shy away from that or think he was, too hard to work for, that really inspired me because that's the type of person I want to be around, and the competitiveness and the expectations that I have for myself. And then the second one in the district was George Cooper. He was the principal at what was then Lee High School. I was the instructional services director. So when I transitioned to the high school, he was my principal and I worked directly under him. And then, of course, had the opportunity to go back to be the principal at Lee. What I appreciated so much about him was he had been at the campus and the principal for about, 11 years when he retired. But I worked with him before that. He was very good at what he did, very confident in the work that he led. And because of that, he allowed those of us that were under him to lead projects, to do work that we would not have had the opportunity to do at other campuses. He had a pulse on everything happening on that campus, but he gave us opportunities to lead and to learn. And then he was always there to help us work through it if it wasn't going quite the way that it needed to. But people like that, really give you the opportunity to have that on-the-job training, to step up and lead projects well before it's the time really for you to be leading that project. And that lays a strong foundation for those future opportunities that you have to not get into that new role and you're leading work for the first time.
And do you think that's where you've got your inspiration in terms of how you lead? Are there characteristics from that you use in your leadership?
Yes, absolutely. So I think about my cabinet first and foremost. I selected a cabinet that is willing to work hard, that's willing to lead their work, and that also understands what I expect of them. Because I do have high standards. They know that I'm going to always find something else we could do, something we could do better, because that's how I'm driven. And I think that's what our students and staff and whole community deserve. But I also think about even at the principal level and aspiring principals level. We talk to our principals all the time about making sure that they're doing principal work and APs are doing their work and those stretch opportunities. Making sure that we give APs the opportunity to learn while they're sitting in the AP seat and not waiting until they become a principal to have to handle that difficult parent situation, that difficult situation with the student or budget or leading PLCs. We want our leaders to step into the role with previous experience and leading at all levels within the organization.
Well, I think that's fantastic that you give people an opportunity to actually almost like practice
right.
what they need to do before they go out into the world. I
Yes.
find that's the same thing with me. I've always enjoyed having bosses who let me fail,
right.
because I find when you do fail at something, that's where you learn the biggest lessons.
Right. Well, and the one thing I really appreciated about both Mr. Torres and Mr. Cooper, Mr. Cooper was next door to me. So I always said if, I was leading a project and kind of got to a point where I wasn't sure, what's next, I could go in and talk through that, and then he would let me go back and get to work on it. If we, were working on something and it wasn't going exactly like it needed to be, he would talk you through it, but then let you go back and own it. And so that's something I'm really working with the team on now, because many times when we get into a leadership role, if something goes wrong, we want to take it and solve the problem for our team. If we do that, they never learn. But if we give them feedback and some ideas and suggestions on how to go back and regroup and then work through those challenges, that's where they truly learn, not from us taking it from them and solving the problem.
Yeah, agreed. And then I'm not that familiar with how the whole education structure works in the US. I mean, the accent might be a slight giveaway, but what does it mean to be a superintendent?
So the superintendent, of course, runs the day-to-day operations of the school district and leads that vision, working with the team of 8, the school board. So the school board sets the goals, sets the vision and the mission. Many times as a superintendent, you come in, you inherit that vision, you inherit the mission, you inherit the board goals. Typically, you sit down with your board and talk through that, and there are times where some of that may change, but it's really important as a superintendent to make sure that the district where you're working is a good fit, because the board will have a vision, and they will have a mission, and they'll have priorities in the form of goals. And those have to be things that you believe in. If you don't believe in that vision and mission, you can't come in and change it typically. It doesn't work like that. And so making sure that it's a good fit. I think about the role of the superintendency. You spend so much of your time engaging and acting with the community. It's actually one of the pillars of our strategic plan. But getting in front of groups, I presented to Rotary last week, and many of the people in Rotary haven't had kids in schools in a number of years. And so engaging the community, keeping them informed of the work that's going on in the district, and then getting everyone pulling in the right direction.
And what would you say is the biggest misconception about your position?
I think the biggest misconception is people have no idea the difficulty of the job, the complexities of the job. You have a board, which is a team, 7 board members. All 7 board members may have different ideas and thoughts around the work that needs to happen. And so, creating that sense of unity and getting everyone on the same page. But I think many people, maybe they think you sit in the office all day and don't really do anything, but a superintendent who's doing a good job and really doing the job in the way that I think it has to be done. They're out and about with the community. They're out at student, events and activities, visiting campuses. I block off time every week to be on campus, because if you don't, you will find something in the office that takes up your time. So being strategic with your time, making sure that you're spending your time in the right places, taking time to coach and support your team, all of those types of things are really important.
Well, it's very impressive. We were just having a discussion a little bit beforehand, and you said that there's actually 39 schools that are under your lead. So, I mean, that's a lot to take on. So, congratulations. And
thank you.
How do you manage to do all of those things on a day-to-day basis?
So, you have to have a great team. I have a great team. Everybody has their roles and responsibilities. We have principal supervisors that directly supervise those 39 campuses. And then, I have the opportunity then to be strategic with how I spend my time. Each year, I get on each campus after school and meet with the faculty and staff there in what we call listen and learn. And so we usually start those in September. We're about to wrap those up this coming month. And that takes anywhere from an hour and a half to 2 hours, a couple of days a week in the afternoons. But that's invaluable to be out with the team, talking about the work in the district, the strategic plan, where we are with that, but then listening to them. What are we doing well, here at the campus or within the district? And then what are things we need to do better? And so we take that, when we leave, we all know what we need to do better, and whoever owns that is expected to go make whatever that is better, whether that be tomorrow or whether that be planning for the coming year to make sure that we think about whatever it is that they bring up. But that time is invaluable, getting out with our teams, getting out to student events and teacher activities and projects and things they're doing. It just builds a culture of team, and it builds a culture of, she thinks this is important. She comes to watch us do what we do, or she comes to support us when we're doing this or that. I think that matters. It matters to people. I know when I was a teacher and a coach, when the principal or superintendent was there, it meant a lot to me. It meant a lot to my students and my athletes.
So you said you sometimes have like difficult decisions that you need to make, or hear difficult news, or sometimes it's a no. How would you guide women in positions of leadership when they get a no? How would you ask them or tell them to look at that and move forward?
I think we all lead differently. We all process differently. So I think it's about finding your style, figuring out what works for you. One of the things that I think is critical is having some professional mentors, that when you get in that situation and you have time, because most things we have to deal with don't have to be decided upon right away. We typically have some time. And so getting all the information, weighing the pros and cons of that, thinking through all the implications, and then running your thoughts by someone else who does the work, or a mentor, someone to say, here's the challenge, here's what I'm thinking, here's why I'm thinking that. Am I missing anything? What are your thoughts? It's much easier to get that input ahead of time than to make the decision and your mentor call and say, hey, why didn't you think about this? And so I think that's something that I would say to any leader, women or men, it doesn't matter. Don't be afraid at any level to have those mentors that you call and bounce ideas off of, because we never get to a point where we are going to make every decision by ourselves and it's right. And so I think just always lean on those people that have supported you along the way, that have done the work along the way, and that have done something maybe you haven't had to make a decision about. Reach out to them and find out how they handled it.
Do you foresee any of your children following in your footsteps? Have they shown any interest?
No. So my oldest daughter, Rayleigh, she was a really good student, a really good high school athlete, ran track and cross country in college the first 2 years she was there. Really wanted her to be a teacher and a coach, and she did not want to do that. So And then our youngest, I don't see her going that route either. Not because I don't encourage them to, because I truly do. I think they see, especially I can joke with them and say, maybe you could be a superintendent, and they're like, absolutely not. So they see the work, they see the amount of time I spend on it. They see the late night calls, the emails. They don't see the emails, but they know that I'm working all hours of the night. They know that we're on vacation, and if I get a call, I need to take that call. You can't just say I'm on vacation for a week. And so I think they see that. I think, kids the age they are, especially our oldest daughter, that work-life balance is a little more important to her than it is to possibly my generation. And so I think having grown up around the business makes them not want to be in the business. And I hate that. But I think it's because they've seen, I feel like if you do the job right, it is a lot of work. And you have to want to do that.
Yeah, so you were just mentioning work-life balance. How do you manage your work-life balance?
So I'm terrible at it. It's, I'm good about telling people they need to do that and, make sure you're taking care of home. In reality, I typically have to remind myself of that. And so what I try to do is, and I have such a supportive husband. The girls are very supportive. Our oldest daughter was born when I was the instructional services director at Lee High School. So she's, was raised with me being an administrator and principal. And then our youngest was born when I was the principal. It was what was in Lee High School. But what I would say is you have to have a good support system and know that there's a time and season where you really do have to spend a little more time with them. And then you can get back to work, if that makes sense. And so the thing that's worked for me is, when I come in at the end of the day, I try to do family at that time. We eat together most every night, unless we're at a school event that, or my daughter's in something. And then when, it's time for them to go to bed, I may get my computer out and go back to work, but trying, not literally back to work, but back to work at home. But trying to figure out a way to be present with them during the time that matters, in the evenings, have dinner, that kind of thing. And, and then those times where you just need to go be at your kids' event because it's important.
I do think that you hit on something very important there, and something that people don't do often enough anymore is like that dinner around the family table. I think in my family growing up, that's something that we always did. It didn't matter how busy everyone was, and those are like really, really fond memories that I have.
Right.
So I'm glad it's not just my family that had those same things, and it's really cool.
That may be the only 30, 45 minutes we get to all sit down together, for the whole day. And so that's kind of how we've used that time, and it's very seldom that we don't do that.
Very cool. And then what would you say would be one of the biggest challenges that you faced in getting to where you are now?
It's kind of hard to explain because I feel like I was always at the right place at the right time. And so I've had opportunities over the years. You mentioned that I taught and coached at Midland High. I actually was not an athletic coach at Midland High. I was a speech and debate coach at Midland High. So I had the opportunity to become an administrative intern. Felt like I was at the right place at the right time. A year and a half later, the instructional services position opened up at what was then Lee High School, had that opportunity. So I feel like things fell into place. Now, if I look back, they fell into place because I worked hard. I tried to learn everything I could, and I networked with people. I tried to get to know other people. And so I don't have those stories of, it took me X number of years to get this job, or it took X number of years to get that job. There were times in my career where I wasn't really looking for a job when that job came available. And quite frankly, had to be talked into some of them. And not because I didn't want to do the job, but I was happy where I was. And so I can't look back and say, well, I didn't think I'd ever get to be a principal. My story is very different. I didn't start out in education. And so my dad was a teacher and coach. I mentioned mom worked at the schools, drove a bus, worked in the cafeteria. So graduating at 17, being a July baby, I was determined not to do what my parents thought I should do, which was be a teacher. So I went to college, started out business marketing, and loved that. But my sophomore year, started seeing older, peers graduate and they couldn't find a job or they were having to relocate. And at that point, I thought, a teacher can always find a job. I can live wherever I want. So switched to education. So it wasn't so much about not wanting to be a teacher as not wanting to do what your parents encourage you to do at 17, right? And so for me, that was it wasn't so much about once I got into the work, because I obviously love it. This is year 30 for me. So when I became a teacher, I certainly didn't set out to be a principal. I never thought about being a superintendent. I just went to work and then had opportunities along the way. I had mentors. My first principal in Stanton was the first female principal I'd been around. And growing up, all the principals were men, and my superintendent, all of them were men. And I really didn't think anything of it. And I'm not one to really separate the difference, because to me, a leader is a leader, and it's not about if you're male or female. But it was when I had that female principal that I thought, maybe I want to be a principal. And so that's when I chose to go back to work on my master's, and that's when we moved to Midland the first time.
And to the young ladies out there who do want to follow in similar footsteps to you, or someone who does want to become a superintendent, what would be some advice that you would give them?
So first advice is do a really good job where you are. Because when you do a really good job where you are, people start to notice that. And that's going to open up doors that you may not have even thought about. The other thing I would say is, being a superintendent has to be a right fit. And so don't just go be a new superintendent because this job is open. Make sure that you're taking the right job. For me, we were tied to this community because of my husband's work. He's now retired, but at the time, we had to be within a 50, 90-mile radius of Midland for me to work, because his job was one that didn't allow for relocation. And so I was never the kind that could just, or would have, upped and moved across the state just because a superintendent's job opened up. And other people are going to do that. It's differences in what works for your family. But the big piece of advice is don't get in such a hurry to be a superintendent that you miss those opportunities to prepare for the superintendency. Make sure you've had a career pathway, that you've had the right layers of leadership. And then also make sure you're not just taking that first job because you want it. Make sure it's the right first superintendency.
That's some really, really good advice. What was your dream job when you were little?
So when I was little, I wanted, two different things. One, I wanted to be a hairstylist. That's what I wanted to be, growing up. And you fix each other's hair and that kind of thing. But I wanted to be an interior decorator. And growing up in a small town, Robert Lee, you referenced that earlier, I graduated with 22. We didn't have interior decorators in Robert Lee. And so my family was, kept saying, no one does that. And I was like, well, not in Robert Lee, but there are interior decorators. And so they, really didn't support that pathway. That's why I went to business marketing, because I was like, I can work this in somehow and they won't know I'm doing that, right? But yeah, they didn't know, in small towns, you only know what you know. There are teachers, there's school, there's just not a lot of professions. And so they really tried to steer me away from those professions that they hadn't really heard of or didn't know anyone that did.
Okay. What projects or initiatives are you most excited about now or that are coming in the future?
So of course the new high schools, the bond projects that we have going on, and not just about the facilities. The facilities are going to be like none other that we've ever had in Midland, but the grade reconfiguration, being able to finally get our ninth graders to the high schools, having them have a true 9-12 experience, getting our sixth graders up to a true middle school where they can have that 6-8 experience, and then freeing up the space at the elementary so that we can grow and expand pre-K. So very excited about that work. But also the work that we're doing around our grow and develop staff pillar of the strategic plan, all of the ways that we're working to support our teachers, to grow teachers. We know teachers have the number one indicator, they're the number one indicator of student success, followed by the principals. So we've really created much of our work with pipelines and pathways into the profession around teachers, getting them into the profession and supporting them once they're in the profession. Also career pathways where we can keep great teachers in the classroom. We have over 51 teachers earning over $100,000 because they're very effective and taking on more roles and responsibilities. And then the same for principals, the work that we're doing around ensuring we have a quality leader on every campus that's prepared and equipped to lead the work, and developing future leaders and developing those that are already in the seats.
That's amazing.
So just thank you so much for coming to Midland and giving me the opportunity to share, and thank you for y'all's work.
Thank you very much. We appreciate
You're
that.
welcome.
Thank you.